at me. They would just laugh at me, literally. They would say, "Ha, it's all silica, it's just silica," you know, and I thought, okay. But as we come to know, silica is so important for strengthening plant tissues and trees. So what happened at the time was I became aware of this very small network, and I knew there was nobody else to put together a newsletter. So I started a newsletter that became this little magazine called Remineralize the Earth through the 80s and the 90s. I have boxes up in my attic of all the wonderful and extraordinary communications by snail mail, you know, of letters from people all over the world. It was a really wonderful time, although being on the internet makes things an awful lot easier. And you can go to archive.org. Please see, I have QR codes here. You can take out your phone and you can zoom in and capture those if you want to go straight to the link. So, so just as an example of this grassroots movement, you know, there are students on the left for forests who were remineralizing Grandfather Mountain, a study that showed like a 20% increase in growth of the trees. This was at a time when the forests were dying. And today I received a link about the forest dying in Germany again, that kind of headline of the forests are dying from acid rain originally, and now they're dying from climate change. So, or due to different reasons that are connected to climate change. So here, the bananas, that's in Queensland, Australia. They had a cyclone and all the banana plantations lost their trees. They lost everything. But the ones that were remineralized, they didn't. The root systems were so strong that they didn't fall over, so they could recover very quickly. And on the right, the Sears Center in Scotland, who were like Finhorn, just growing these huge vegetables and fruits and so on. So, and lasted until, well, just a couple of years ago. They aren't, Sears Center isn't long. So they were original pioneers also of this movement. So it looks like the California Indians of the Sierra Nevada and the coastal ranges practice silviculture and remineralization. Those really extraordinary standout Sequoia stands were part of silviculture. They were managed. They weren't just growing wild. We had forests at that time that were managed by Native Americans. And so they found at some of these Sequoia basins, Sequoia stands, basins where you see the tools on the right have been found with shell fragments from seashells and rock dust broken down into rock dust and applied. Obviously, it was probably applied and helping to create those beautiful stands. So Dr. Lee Klinger has a wonderful website called Sun Oak Live, where he's saving a lot of the dying California oaks. And when he was working on one of his projects, he discovered this beautiful grandmother oak that he thinks is about 500 years old, a really magnificent tree that was just all hit there. You know, there were all these other trees growing into it, and he cleared it, gave it space, and then he treated it with compost tea, alkaline-rich minerals, and a lime-wash poultice to the trunk. And in 2 years, it tremendously recovered and hopefully will go on for another few hundred years. So I love this realization of, you know, combining the biology with geology here. You know, that's how the parent soils were formed, through rocks and organic matter. So here are some pioneers of remineralization, and I just like to point to Steve in the bottom right-hand corner, Steve Diver, And I'll talk a little bit about him during the discussion, and a tremendous difference he made for us in being probably the only, or at least first, government agency that actually, had information about rock dust and remineralization and how to do it. And then here, Maura and Cameron Thompson, Sears Center in Scotland. Some of you may have come across David Yarrow, who's spoken at many conferences and just has a brilliant take on everything from rock dust to biochar. And of course, John Homaker and Don Weaver, who did the original book of The Survival of Civilization. So in this book was an incredibly impressive trial that was done by John, who was a mechanical engineer and a farmer in Michigan. And so he applied rock dust, and you can see, first he just tested the soil and he got those nubbins on the right. And then he applied rock dust, and you can see the difference is quite dramatic. And the next year, no rock dust was applied, but you can see it goes on improving, and depending on the amount added, for a number of years. So it doesn't need to be applied every year. So the glacial rock dust produced 65 bushels of corn per acre, compared to 25 bushels from the other local farms, which were, probably with chemicals, with no irrigation. And you can see here, I took this from a Brazilian conference there, but you can see the increase in protein, calcium, phosphorus, magnesium, and particularly potassium, which is, by the way, very important for Brazil, very dramatic increases. So the book really inspired me. I suggest that you take a look at it. It's available for free online. So rock dust primer is on my website, and if you go there, please go ahead and download it. But I wanted to put a few pages here on a few slides on it, just to give you an idea of the benefits of remineralization. So it's providing a slow, natural release of elements and trace minerals, up to 70 minerals and trace elements or more. It's increasing the nutrient intake of plants. It increases yield and gives a higher Brix reading, rebalances the soil pH in whatever direction it needs to go. It increases the growth of microorganisms and earthworm activity. So I know that's something you will all appreciate. And also building the humus complex, preventing soil erosion, very important in the laterite soils in South America, like Brazil, where the heavy rains, they put the chemicals and then those get washed away by the heavy rains, but not rock dust. Rock dust stays there. It's heavy, would do even better with biochar in terms of holding, in the soil and building the soil. So it increases the storage capacity. It increases resistance to insects, disease, frost, and drought. Produces more nutritious crops and enhances the flavor. So Alice Waters of Chez Panisse, all her fruits and vegetables are remineralized by Bob Kennard in Sonoma. And so, decreases dependence on fertilizers, pesticides, and herbicides. Let's hope it can replace them. So composting with rock dust it's a great way to introduce rock dust. So you can add 2 to 20 pounds, 1 to 12 kilograms per cubic meter of rock dust per cubic yard of compost, if you're making a compost pile or for windrow composting. So when I joined with Steve, I want to talk about Lübke, because I also went to the Lübke farm in Austria in the 1980s, and very important to them was rock dust. So rock dust really heats up the compost and increases the time of the process. So it's created much more quickly. So I think really important is this idea of creating soil biological balance and rock dust naturally deterring insects, weeds, and fungi without disturbing ecosystems. So for example, for deterring insects, in the short term, you can do a spray if there's an infestation and it will stop the infestation. Sorry, I don't have a photo here, but if you see insects highly magnified, you'll see that the rock dust gets into their segments and they can no longer mate. So it doesn't wipe them all out and kill them. It just stops the infestation and increases and creates, the right insect balance. But also, when you add the rock dust in the long term, the insects will not be disturbing it because they're drawn. They're looking out for. They're nature's recyclers, so they are looking out for weak plants to recycle, basically. And if they're strong and healthy, you won't be having those insect infestations. So I have a few video clips here and there to help break up things and just give me a little bit of a breather too. And so we know that, so there's two things I want to talk about. One is, well, natural processes to return minerals to the soil through glaciers, volcanoes, volcanic eruptions, alluvial deposits. Okay, that's where the rock dust comes from. At the same time, we have these quarries, thousands and thousands, millions and millions of tons, where the rock dust is just sitting there as a byproduct. And we have a great use for it. Instead of using, after all that construction and creating freeways, we can take the byproduct and return it to soils and create soil fertility. So I'm going to just turn this on for you for a moment.
Most soils benefit from being remineralized, which is where we're bringing in minerals to boost nutrition that's been lost over the years for various reasons. And ocean water is one of my favorite ways to do that. And another favorite way is through rock dust. I can show you some here. This one happens to be a really fine powder. And when you're looking for a rock dust, you want to find it from rocks that have a lot of different minerals in them, like a basalt, which is volcanic rock, or even like glacial till, which is many different types of rocks that were brought together during a period of glaciation. And so there's a lot of minerals in there. So what you do is you find this rock dust and you apply, often the recommendation is 50 pounds per 1,000 square feet. Although I have seen some research where as little as 5 pounds was applied and still amazing benefits were seen, like increased yields and more nutrition and all of the benefits we would hope to expect when we're bringing more minerals into our soil. And what you do is just spread it all over your soil. And so the best way to get the dust is to go to a quarry. There's quarries all over the place. And they're mining this stuff, and the dust is actually a byproduct for them. So you can get it, it's very inexpensive. There's not much for them to do with it. So it doesn't cost much. But when you do that, you want to test to see what you're getting to make sure it's worthwhile to use on the garden, to make sure it has a lot of minerals. Otherwise, if you're just doing a small garden, then it can be worthwhile to buy it in a bag, then you know what you're getting. And that's what this is here. Either way, what we're doing is with this dust is we're really kind of mimicking what happens during periods of glaciation or during volcanic eruptions when the minerals get redistributed back into the soil.
Okay, so quantities for application. So this is just to give you a rough sense of application rates. And basically, this is in the primer on our website, so you can look it up there. And talking about particle size conversion, Hammaker used to say the ideal, if you just went to quarry and you're in the byproduct, you could find 80% going through a 200 mesh screen. That's great because the fine material goes to work right away, literally in hours, to activate, the microorganisms. It's food for the earthworms and so on. And the coarser material will break down over time. But if you're not able to get 80%, you still might be able, it still might be great to go ahead and use it. You might just want to apply a little bit more. And so one thing we say in the primer is when you go to a quarry, ask them for a geological description of the material. This will give you an idea, and they often have a mineral analysis. So, you know, that can be very helpful if you want to add it right away. But he also suggests, like Helmerker, that you can do your own tests to make sure that it's a good source for you. So that's a little bit of background history. And now I just want to say, we reached a point today where remineralization is really taking off. This is so exciting for me because I've been at it for a very long time, and there were so many years where, you know, I would literally go down to Washington, have somebody from my board who was the Commissioner of Agriculture for Massachusetts stand beside me, you know, to lend me credibility. It literally, you know, it took so many decades for the science to turn around, and the most exciting turnaround has been since 2017. Those developments with enhanced weathering are really, really major. So I'm going to show you a little bit of a documentary called Dirt Rich, which I highly recommend seeing. Dr. Tom Garreau on our board of directors is in it. And there's a part in the trailer where he's in Costa Rica. And that part is actually about remineralization, even though you can't quite tell that from the trailer. But also note that Tom very much advocates rock dust and biochar, as our book does. And I think, you can get an idea here. You'll see this young man in Hawaii who is very well known for the biochar. His name is just slipping at the moment. I don't remember it, but I saw at the University of Massachusetts at a biochar conference him giving a presentation. I said, wow, you live in Hawaii. Aren't you using bluestone? As he, had done the presentation on biochar. And he said, well, yes, of course, I always use that. And I said, yeah, but you didn't mention in your presentation that you used it with the biochar. So I just want to throw that out. That is quite a combination.
Part of the problem with discussion about the climate crisis is that it focuses excessively on emissions.
So what is all this talking about? Carbon comes from the atmosphere through photosynthesis.
Mangroves can be up to half carbon.
Oh, now, mama, don't you look my way.
Why am I motivated because I'm angry at what the world is doing to our environment?
Unless we undertake very serious work, making our soil healthier, revegetating the land, not doing the things that release that carbon from the soil, there's no way that we can deal with the climate crisis.
I think that farming regeneratively is the only way that we will have a world worth living in the near future.
What does the UN say? We have 60 years left, 60 to 100 harvests left.
Yeah, harvest left.
It's so downright tragic how far we've let it go that it can be scary. But that's the stubbornness in me. I stand up and say, you know what? Stubborn ass son of a bitch. I'm not gonna let that stop me.
You start talking about a farming as a real economy. All bills get paid.
Humans are the smartest animal. Oh, no. Oh, no, we're far from it. We're just pooping in our own mouths.
Okay, so here we are. I want to tell you a little bit about Remineralize the Earth. So again, we promote the use of natural land and sea-based minerals to restore soils and forests, produce nutrient-dense foods, and remove excess CO2 from the atmosphere. And what we do is we bring together farmers and gardeners, scientists and policymakers, as well as the general public, through education, outreach, projects, research, and advocacy. So it's really still facilitating, like I did, with the newsletter and the magazines. The organization facilitates, and reports on or more reports on maybe what's going on around the world, as well as our own projects. So we can create food security and restore the balance, restore the climate. And I'm just going to go on. Okay, so making an impact on a global scale. I put this because of Greg Watson on my board of directors, who has the World Games workshop of Buckminster Fuller, this wonderful, wonderful map of the Earth. And I imagine when I look at it, these community-based projects all over the world taking off, as well as, the larger scale initiatives that we need to stabilize the climate. So one project that's super exciting to me is at UC Davis and Cornell. So their estimate is that by applying crushed volcanic rock to agricultural soils, they could remove 2.8 billion tons of carbon over a 5-year period. That's a huge amount, although it's hard to take it in, what it actually means. The Working Lands Innovation Center aims to catalyze negative carbon emissions at multi-acre scales in partnership with California researchers, state agencies, industry farmers, ranchers, tribes, and small business owners and development. It's the largest scale project of its kind. And so it's really exciting because it's set in a real world setting and, trying to determine the best application rates. So Ben Holton, who was in the photograph of the last slide, is now the dean at Cornell. And he's working more with enhanced weathering to find out, the chemical weathering aspect of basalt. And so early evidence suggests crop yield increase of 10 to 29%. Take a look at this wonderful article in GRIST. A new initiative uses indigenous insights to amplify soil's ability to absorb CO2. Well, this video means a lot to me because when I saw this video the first time, I actually cried. I cried because I honestly never thought I would live to see scientists take up remineralization on this scale. And not only that, not just scientists putting out study after study, but actually committed to making a difference in a way that I found very powerful when I saw it. So I'm going to put this on for you as well. Whoops. That was not my intention.
We're already seeing the effects of climate change. This isn't a future scenario.
More floods, more droughts. These are the things that are likely to impact people.
Sorry, I'm going to try to stay here on my page here.
We're already seeing the effects of climate change. This isn't a future scenario.
More floods, more droughts. These are the things that are likely to impact people more than just simple change in the average temperature.
The only way that we're really going to ameliorate that is to phase down our fossil fuel carbon dioxide emissions and couple that approach with techniques that capture carbon.
We can reduce our fossil fuel emissions, but actually that's not going to be enough. We're going to need to actively take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere as well.
So the Leverhulme Center has received considerable funding from the Leverhulme Foundation. to try to address one of the grand challenges facing society today, which is how to mitigate the rapid change in the climate system caused by human activities.
The technique we're looking at is called enhanced weathering. It's a process whereby you spread mineral rocks on agricultural land.
The centre is specifically going to be looking at whether by applying a basalt fertiliser instead of the normal nutrient fertilisers to agricultural crops, we can use that as a way of taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere.
We could accelerate the natural sequestration of carbon that occurs in geology when silicate rocks are digested and carbonate rocks form.
At the same time, the rock dust acting as a fertiliser on the land and improving crop production and crop protection against pathogens as well, effectively addressing both the questions of global environmental change from climate change, but also in terms of issues of sustainability of food production and soil sustainability.
So the bottom line could be that we could fertilise the crops with rocks, farming with rocks if you like, but at the same time reduce our agrochemical usage of fertilisers and pesticides. And of course that lowers the cost to the farmer and potentially could lower the cost of food production.
So the centre was set up to test this idea on a big scale in different environments, different parts of the world, different cropping systems. So it's very broad in terms of the people who are involved, but it's quite focused in that it's testing one particular idea really thoroughly.
We have theme 1, the Earth System Science theme. Theme 2, experimental science. Theme 3 is applied science, and theme 4 is society and sustainability.
Without this sort of approach, I don't think this sort of huge societal challenge can be addressed. So it has to be a collaborative effort.
Each of the specialisms bring their own highly honed and individual levels of expertise to what is a complex and multifaceted question.
Scientists can think up good ideas in the laboratory, but there's always a test of public acceptability that has to be made. To understand the context of whether it makes sense to do enhanced weathering, you've really got to look at the coupled problem that connects the natural system dynamics to the social system dynamics and add a model for the whole thing.
What we have to do, and what the Leverhulme project is doing, is looking at ways we can do this which will be economically feasible.
Responding to climate change is one of the most complicated and one of the most long-term projects humanity has ever undertaken.
If we're going to manage this challenge, it's going to involve new policies, new laws, and new ways of behaving.
We have to think not of ourselves. That in itself is a challenge for human beings. We have to think of future generations.
This research programme is one part of the effort that has to be made to deal with climate change.
It's a bit like trying to avoid a supertanker hitting the rocks. You have to start turning away very early on, because if you leave it too late, it becomes impossible.
We can do something, but we need to start now.
With mitigation and adaptation, we can provide a future.
And it involves becoming, as it were, part of the geology of the planet. And that's what this project looks at. It looks at how to use geological processes that we've studied in the abstract and in the past, how to actually bring them under human control and use them for the stewardship of the planet in a way that benefits everybody.
So I'm going to try to get back in a presentation mode. I hope you're still seeing it. It's a little bit hard for me to tell, but hopefully you can. Let me just see if I can get into the mode again. Okay, there we are. Okay, so I wrote veering towards geoengineering. I just, when I read the description of the conference a couple days ago and was thinking about it, I thought I just wanted to throw in some philosophical questions here and there on the slides that could come up in the discussion, for example. And one of the things about Leverhulme Center is they sound like, you know, they're really wanting to move towards more regenerative. Well, I would say UC Davis absolutely is, you know, looking at it from the perspective of regenerative agriculture. But one of the things I found with Leverhulme is when they communicate about it, it sounds like geoengineering. Instead of just saying, hey, we can go beyond organic agriculture, we can, you know, do so many things from a nature perspective. They aren't environmental scientists, so they don't tend to do that. And they had there was an article in the Washington Post, and I went underneath and I put literally 30 comments because people were really alarmed, you know, by the idea of it. So anyway, nope, I want to move on. Okay, so University of Copenhagen. Now we're moving from basalt to glacial material. And this is an extraordinary perspective, the Greenland Perspective from the University of Copenhagen. And this TED Talk is great. I really recommend that you watch it. It's too long for me to show it here. But he's basically saying, what can the North do for the tropics? We have rich countries, rich soils. We have poor countries, poor soils. And so he's suggesting that the Arctic has a resource which could be used to remineralize the tropics. Obviously, I suppose, transported by boat. So anyway, that's an interesting thought. I'm going to go a little bit further here and show you their idea.
The challenge we are facing about food production and the environmental impact of food production, including climate change, is an enormous challenge. It cannot be ignored. And what we know for sure is that it's not going to be business as usual. We have to find new solutions for the future agriculture to minimize environmental impact and to maximize the productivity of the system. We have taken on the task to explore the fertilization potential of this Greenlandic rock dust. We had low expectations when we started the work, and it's quite amazing to see that it actually has some effect. The largest potential by far are on the depleted soils of mainly the tropical and subtropical regions around the world. This is also where we have the largest production potential. These areas are producing maybe 10 to 25% of their potential. And so we have a huge possibility to increase in a sustainable way the food production in these areas. So we have done 2 trials so far, one with maize and one with lupine. Lupine is a legume which has a very high capacity to release nutrients from soil. And we have surprisingly very positive results. We have almost 50% increase in the biomass of the lupine in a very short period of time, 8 weeks. So compared to our expectations, this is an extremely positive consequence. First of all, we have to really develop our understanding on how we can maximize or optimize the use of this resource. This is what we're looking at right now, to look at different biological modifications, whether it's fermentation or co-composting, whether it's the use of, like the lupine I mentioned before, a root system that can really extract the nutrients. So we have to refine and optimize the agronomic system around it, because it's not a resource that is immediately available. So it will take some optimization. Once that is done, then there is a challenge in terms of implementing this, because we are talking about production systems that are challenged in many different ways because of infrastructure challenges, economic capacity of the farmers, the connection to markets. So all the normal problems that surround what we develop will also apply for this product. But this is stuff that we can do. I imagine we can already start having demonstration trials, also learn by doing the demonstration trials. We can start that tomorrow in theory. I don't think we have a marketable product right now, but we have something which is ready to go also to field level testing, besides the more fundamental research we're doing right now.
So we need to remineralize on a vast scale. And so Greenland's Perspective aims to create food security in the tropics. And well, is it possible to scale up from a deep ecology perspective on this level? Well, I just throw that out to you. I should put it in blue as my philosophical question. But anyway, one thing that came up here that just really was tremendous for me, and all these decades I had never thought of it. And that is, if you could remineralize the deltas of the world, you would de-acidify the oceans and restore the coral reefs. So that, you know, instead of the nitrogen runoff, we have, you think of the Nile River before the dam, when the sediment was used, it was so fertile, the Nile River was so fertile, and the Mediterranean was alive. Actually, the dam really kind of killed the Mediterranean Sea, I mean, in terms of a lot of life. So, so now, thinking about, well, how do we create an infrastructure for large-scale implementation? Here, how much of an impact can we make? For example, this is it's called the En-ROAD simulator. I don't think going to play this at the moment, but it's interesting. I don't know if you can see the QR on the right. I'm not seeing it right now, but anyway, because I'm seeing the panel. But so you can put in for biochar, rock dust, and they're coming up with trying to see what a difference it could make with the data that they have, which of course is pretty theoretical, but starts to give an idea. So we've had a project in a Stonehouse Farm, which is a farm of Abby Rockefeller. And we partnered to integrate rock dust and biochar into their farming system and to measure pivotal data like carbon sequestration, and to show that soils and agriculture will be playing a crucial role in stabilizing the climate. So Stonehouse Farm and Hudson Carbon are, in any case, organic farming. They're for commodities farming. So they're hoping to transition commodities farmers over to organic and regenerative agriculture. We have not been able to get a lot of data because of COVID. The lab testing is way behind, but hopefully we're going to have some results one of these days. So I have a little story to tell about cannabis, and that is the cannabis growers were decades ago the pioneers of remineralization also. I used to go to the forums and I would read them, and the growers there were talking about rock dust, their experience with rock dust before it was really happening very much. And well, when you think about it, it's so important for that profit motive that they have. It's a tremendous incentive, and they were willing to try all kinds of alternatives. So now, you know, this is another farm. It's legal in Massachusetts, and that is using rock dust and biochar for CBD oil with great results. And I think it's actually starting on a larger scale in Canada, for example. So here is one rock dust company that is literally looking to get the funding to carry out remineralization for 12 Western states. And UC Davis is the impetus because there are so many partners that have come together around that. And also, you know, reward farmers with a cryptocurrency called Carbon Coin. And so far they have one 80,000 square foot facility, and they hope to get the funding to create 10 fertilizer production facilities to supply the 12 Western states. Oh, I think I might have skipped one. Oh, let me see if I can just go out and stop. Not stop the share. What do I do? Oh, yeah. See if this, yeah, takes me back out so I can go to Rockdust Local, go back to the slideshow. Okay, so now Tomvanagor, another remineralization pioneer with it from the very beginning, wants to build a global infrastructure for, you know, all the rock dust sources, not create a product to sell so much as to create the infrastructure through the quarries of what's available and what is going to work for different regions and so on. So he says, adding rock dust and biochar and fertilizer formulations to the regenerative biologic agricultural model provides the missing underpinnings for a global climate stabilization technology, combining enhanced weathering and remineralization with a regenerative biological agriculture model yields measurable and synergetic effects. And we've worked on him, we've worked with him on a lot of projects. He's donated rock dust for our projects a number of times. He actually provides the rock dust for the Liverpool Center for Climate Mitigation at the University of Illinois. And he also provided the rock dust for UC Davis. So I want to mention Dr. Dalton Chen. I don't know if any of you are familiar with him. I'm not going to talk about it too much, but I think his work is really important. And so I hope you'll take a look on your own at it. So a citizen-led initiative to protect climate, communities, and ecosystems. So if you're a farmer in the Philippines or in India, don't wait, you know, instead of waiting for the government to have carbon credits, who knows when and how that might happen, this actually bypasses governments and rewards farmers and does it by through the banking system, and basically creating also a kind of cryptocurrency. And so it's hard for me to explain how it works. I don't feel like I'm explaining it really well right now. So just consider going to the website, because the idea that farmers could be incentivized and reap a global carbon reward, bypassing countries to make that happen, governments, I think is a great idea. So we've also worked on legislative initiatives in the last year quite a bit. This is one of the important ways to make it happen. And we've worked with Methane Action and the Climate Protection and Restoration Initiative, which is in part climate scientist James Hansen. And I have a project for Haiti that I'll be showing you in a few moments, a little bit later, that we put into legislation, hoping to get it funded. So now remineralization around the world, I think maybe I have to go a little bit quicker. I just skipped something though that feels kind of important to me. Let me see if I can go out of it again and see what it was that I skipped. Okay. So more pioneers for agrogeology. So agrogeology started in Canada, but it was especially focused on tropical soils. And I love all of these people so much. I have spent a lot of time in Brazil and with these researchers, who just had a conference recently online. So the agroecology movement implies the use of rock dust in Brazil. It's become very common with agroecology that remineralization is a part of it. That's not true everywhere else that agroecology is practiced, but that seems to be the case there. So Brazil, I would say, is the emerging leader as a country of remineralization so far. And ITER recently said to me, we're keen to develop a partnership with RTE to study the potential for carbon sequestration utilizing soil remineralization. So that means if I can get larger funding, which I hope to do, that we could partner together on a project. So agrogeology is defined as geology in the service of agriculture. For the last 20 years in Brazil, or even longer than 20 years, in the 12 regions, they've had research projects. And by now they have so many students doing their thesis, and we translate those for our research database, but it goes very slowly, but we still have maybe 70 studies up there that have been translated from Portuguese. So Brazil has emerged as the global leader for research and development, and more recently legislation and implementation. There are 2 laws that passed through Congress to do with remineralization as a soil amendment, and a criteria for rock dust companies to be able to create a product. And they have remineralized 5 million hectares. 1 million tons are being sold annually. And that's pretty amazing. I'm quite stunned because that's really fairly recently that that's happened. This is a project where RTE did partner with the University of Brasilia on cactus for fodder, which is really important in semi-arid regions of the world like Madagascar and so on. We used two species of cactus, and we got almost 4 times the growth of the rock for the rock dust plus compost versus the control. There was a 4-fold increase of calcium and a 2-fold increase of magnesium. So these results were very exciting. So impacting sustainability local to global, I want you to imagine, and I'm just going to show you soon in a video, an agroforestry model that grows a variety of fruits and vegetables with coffee and cacao, with 1 initial application of rock dust and no outside inputs thereafter. So soil remineralization is simple, intuitively learned, and applicable at the community level. The materials are inexpensive and among the planet's most abundant resources. So here I'm going to show you a little bit this project just outside of Brasilia, which I've visited a number of times and really love. I think it's just extremely inspiring, and I can't show you the whole thing. It's about 20 minutes long, but I'm going to try to pick apart.
De fruta e madeira, a gente tem 3 linhas de horta, ou seja, hortas entre os canteiros de agrofloresta. O foco do nosso trabalho aqui é recuperação de solo com produção de hortaliça e futuramente fruta, né? Então, a gente tem que procurar um sistema para restaurar os ambientes que funcione, que produza e que retorne. Porque sustentabilidade tem que ser econômica, social e ambiental. Esse é o meu sonho. Vamos plantar floresta e vamos manejar a floresta, mostrando que o caminho para a floresta produz alimento e a floresta produz alimento. E aí, quando eu conheci o Ernest, foi como se ele pegasse todos esses princípios que estavam numa nuvem, entendeu? E organizasse um foco. Você acha um indivíduo que está fazendo o que você sempre sonhou em fazer já há 30 anos na sua frente, já com tudo realizado, com tudo pronto, vivendo aquilo.
E a gente vê que o João e o Romulo são 2 jovens que decidiram questionar o modelo de sucesso e o padrão de vida que eles queriam para eles mesmos.
E dentro disso eu me encantei com esse mundo de possibilidades de fazer ecologia na prática, não só da boca para fora.
O primeiro papel do Ernesto na minha vida foi esse, sem dúvida.
Hoje, quando a gente olha o sítio deles, parece um pequeno oásis no meio de uma região que já foi muito degradada por práticas de agromineração, pelo fogo.
Se você filmar ali, você vai ver qual era a situação anterior a esse sistema. Era um capim andropólogo, um sistema de acumulação inicial.
Nos primeiros plantios, quando a gente pega a terra do zero, que as terras aqui são 10, 15 anos abandonadas e não cresce nada, né? Só o capim fica dominando, a vegetação não consegue mais vir, porque o sistema já não permite isso, tanta degradação. Então, no início, a gente faz uma adubação semelhante à adubação da agricultura orgânica de alta escala. E aí, na sequência, quando a gente vai refazer as hortas, eu já começo, cada vez que eu faço uma horta nova, a gente já coloca bem menos. Pó de rocha já não entra nunca mais, que é a correção do solo e a remineração, a gente só coloca uma vez.
No momento que eu colher aqui, o solo vai estar melhor do que ele estava antes.
Então esse é o nosso grande diferencial, que aí com 2 anos, 3 anos, a gente já começa a ver a diferença de que não precisa mais repetir aquela adubação pesada. A água, cada vez eu uso menos, porque o solo está acumulando água. O tratorzinho, na hora que ele vai passar para fazer o canteiro de novo, ele não precisa mais fazer tanta força, porque a terra está tão fofa, que é só ele passar para a marcha leve que ele você gasta menos o tratorzinho, porque a terra não está compactada. Porque a chuva não compacta a terra, e a seca não deixa a terra seca, né? Então, cada vez que a gente vai trabalhar, a gente está otimizando. Aquele capim de terra ácida, ele não entra aqui mais. Você pode plantar ele aqui que ele não vai mais.
E é a isso que o Ernest se refere quando ele fala em agricultura de processos e não agricultura de insumos. Não tem nada de dogmático. No caso deles, houve uma adubação inicial para dar viabilidade econômica para o sistema desde a implantação.
Sorry to leave it. I need to go on. I'm looking at the time. I'm going to have to move a little bit more quickly. It's hard to change to the next slide sometimes. So in Mexico, there's a collaborative called EcoAgro. They have a conference every year. And they combine rock dust, compost teas, incredibly sophisticated formulations. Well, this is a very old slide, and it says 30 to 40,000 hectares remineralized in Sinaloa. This article, True Hero, I put up recently on the website, so you can read an update. We have... I see I just skipped another one, but I think I'm going to just keep going. So we had a project, RTE, or I say we, because Dr. Garreau had a project and he's on our board, and it became our project, so to speak, where it was at a quarry and the rock dust was blowing onto a part of an acacia stand of trees and not on another part of it. So it was a kind of beautiful natural demonstration, if you will. And he analyzed and saw there was an 8-fold increase in biomass for acacia mangium trees that were planted. And then a 2.17 times increase in the height. 4 times the survivability from the trees. Actually, the trees on the local soil did not survive. So I'm going to have to go through these kind of quickly, but you can see the increases in magnesium, manganese, organic matter, fertility, phosphorus, pH, potassium, and so on. And here are some of the trace elements. I think I just skipped another one, but that's okay. I think you get the idea for that. That's in our book. So Cuba, we visited Cuba in 2015, and the resources for rock dust there would be very promising. We would love to be able to go back and do farmer to farmer type workshops there using the local sources of rock dust. The Future Forest Company really inspires me a lot, and I love their very aggressive statement there. We exist to remove CO2 at scale from the atmosphere, stop global warming, fight climate change, and protect biodiversity. Step 1, planting 50 million trees by 2025. Step 2, trialing and deploying complementary carbon removal technologies. biochar, and enhanced weathering to remove an estimated 10 times more CO2 than through reforestation alone. So one study shows approximately 2 tons of rock dust per acre after one application can sequester 1 ton of carbon for forests. And the other interesting thing, because I know, with the theme of the conference is talking about technology. How can we, make the best use of technology? Can we apply it in nature farming? How do we put this all together? There they are developing electric vehicles, which can, with AI, apply the rock dust and biochar throughout the sites. So I have a feeling that some of you out there are more familiar than I am with the Miyawaki method. And, but, it can be combined with remineralization. And James Godfrey Fawcett of Wild Urban Spaces in the UK suggests that the microforest growth rates could be increased 10 times with rock dust. And I don't know whether he's actually gotten that expressed. I have to go back and read the article again. I haven't read it in quite a while, but you might take a look. So coming back to, legislation, we came up with this project. We put it in the legislative document and looking for US aid or other grants. And unfortunately, between, the political and the earthquakes, it's definitely on hold, but it's a project that I would love to see somewhere else in the Caribbean. I think that kind of agroforestry project you just saw is ideal for the Caribbean and will create more resilient food systems. You have limestone islands, which are very barren, and you have volcanic islands, and you have all the rock dust from Montserrat, which is available there for the limestone islands to so they don't have to import food. So what do we aim to do as an organization? So we want to create sustainable models and help transition industrial agriculture. And we want to partner with government agencies and NGOs to establish agroforestry projects, as I just mentioned. We'd love to coordinate an effort to mount a forest remineralization campaign in the West, because the trees become very drought resistant and could have a tremendous impact as far as forest fires go. And we also, let me just take you to this project. It is very dear to my heart, and it's not quite online yet, but we're just about ready to get it up. And it's just creating an online tool for teachers and students to engage with fun design experiments with rock dust. And then with the results, they are really becoming junior scientists. They are contributing to our database, and they will go up on a GIS map where you'll be able to press on the map, see what the local rock dust was that they used, and so on and so forth. And they'll have text, photos, and video, whatever they put up. So, but we need larger funding, all in all, to be able to carry out some of these things, and looking for that funding. So we are involved in domestic and international projects. Right now, we have a project in South Africa that we're putting together with a scientist with the Leverhulme, who's actually moving from the Leverhulme Center to the Future Forest Company, and a farmer in South Africa, a small stakeholder farmer, and a researcher at Northwest University. And we're going to do both a field trial on the farm and pot tests, and hope to be able, Tabane, the farmer, hopes to set an example and will be able to make rock dust available to these small stakeholder farmers in his community. So Remineralize the Earth has a very small budget. I don't get paid a real salary. I hope to one of these days if we get larger funding. We depend very much on volunteers, and our volunteers are amazing. They're students, researchers, scientists, and so on. And they just provide incredible value to our organization. And I would like, to thank the one student from Brown, or not student, actually, she is a teaching assistant there, for helping me put together this. And here is our board of directors. Greg Watson, whom I mentioned, would fly down to Washington and stand next to me with the USDA. We had a symposium there. We were able to have a symposium. Tara has been with us since the beginning, and she's a regulatory lawyer, and Tom has been with us since about 2015. And a big part of RTE is his work, such as our book, which is one of the slides that somehow got skipped over, our geotherapy book. But anyway, it's time. Oh, it's late. Okay, so I'm going to thank you very much. Join us, help us transform the world with Rockdust. I want to play a song. I'm going to try to tell you the story super quickly of this song. I was doing an interview at the University of Massachusetts on the radio, and they said, bring some music. And I was like, what? Bring some music? And so my daughter, her partner is a composer and musician in Portland, Oregon. And he put this together for me in about 2 days. So we'll just segue over to the Q&A with this music.
Remineralize. Bring on a future of cloudy farms and gardens, producing healthy, nutritious, great abundance. Turn the forces, the strengths we haven't seen in centuries. Solidly sequester CO2 that is so brilliant to save the climate, green environment, remineralization, the call to action. Time to get the people on it. The science irrefutable. Rock dust is very useful. Rainforest to main forest. Any plant that's really used an alternative to chemicals. The results that are commendable. Put it in your backyard. Tell your neighbors that too. The future is our play. Only we can shape it. Go to remineralize.org. All that future be your patience.
Oh, that's great, Joanna. Was that some college students?
No, that was a musician in Portland who's the partner of my daughter, actually.
Oh, that was great.
Yeah, so let me just make an appearance again. Whoops.
Hi.
Hello.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you.
Yes, I hope you enjoyed it. And sorry, I couldn't really look at the chat. I would have liked to. I saw it coming up here and there, and I wanted to, but I couldn't quite do it. So hopefully, Peter, you can help facilitate that. And Steve, thank you so much for being here to join me. As I said, I'd love to have a scientist at my side.
Oh, thank you, Joanne. Well, actually, the ATRA Resource Center, which is the National Sustainable Agriculture Information Service that is funded by USDA, started back in the late 1880s, and of course, all through the early 90s, we had, I think, almost every issue of Remineralize the Earth. So that was an important important. So it's always been an important source.
So, Steve, when you said hello to me yesterday, I was kind of stunned because I realized I feel like I know you, but I don't think we've actually ever met or spoken to each other. Is that true?
Correct. That's what I was saying. I mean, Remineralize the Earth is in our library. We're pouring through it, trying to figure out remineralization. Of course, we had emails a couple of years ago, and then no, it's the first time we've actually met.
Yeah. So great. So glad to meet you finally.
Right, and so just spinning off a couple of things from your lecture that I found very interesting was some of the history. But yes, I'm very impressed with the research and the application in Brazil. It's really amazing. The top science papers on rock dust are coming out of Brazil right now.
Yeah, and I just want to say one thing about that. About a year and a half ago, Embrapa, which is like the USDA, and that was what I was showing in the slides, what they're doing. They have been sort of under the radar all these years in Brazil, and somehow the industrial ag business got very upset and actually came out in Embrapa and said, well, we see that you've done these studies for 20 years, but it's really not showing a good outcome, or particularly. So they were basically saying they had to do away with it. And about 150 scientists or something wrote to the head of Embrapa and said, hey, wait a minute, these studies have been very successful. And so when the Brazil conference is only every 3 years, when it was coming up, I asked him about it, and he said, no, that's not a problem any longer. So I was so relieved to hear it, because I really had the feeling, I would be in the airport in Brazil and Monsanto would have these big photo displays everywhere, how they're green and sustainable and all of that, So I just figured, that they, at some point, I guess they were going to react. So I think what's happening with this large scale remineralization there in Brazil, I wonder, and I need to ask them, if some kind of compromise. It sounds like they're, again, it can kind of fall into a transition of industrial agriculture over to more sustainable methods.
Well, over time, agriculture comes around. Like in the United States, probably the most remarkable thing that's happened in sustainable agriculture is in RCS, which is part of USDA, the soil, basically the whole Soil Conservation Service has totally embraced soil health, concepts around soil health, and then, obviously no-till, cover crops, multi-species cover crops, roll down cover crops, soil biology, mycorrhizae, the whole thing. And a lot of farmers who are not part of, what we can normally consider the alternative ag, to them, it's just good farming. They're coming around to that, and that's what we want.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry. Yeah, the Agricultural Committee, for example, in Congress, my congressman is Jim McGovern, and he's on the Agriculture Committee. And they're tremendously knowledgeable. And Greg Watson and I recently, met with his legislative aide online. And normally Greg told me these things last 20 minutes. And if you're the legislative aide, you're thinking, how can I, move away from this or whatever. And he was on with us for more than an hour. He was obviously really fascinated. And you think of like Bernie Sanders, so many people now are really aware of regenerative agriculture, sustainable, organic, and so on. And it's exciting, hopefully we've got to move along quickly, but hopefully it will really be all taking off.
So let me mention one more thing, and then we can do some questions and answers. But another thing that may help people to tie together was, yesterday in my lecture, I was talking about soil, some enzymes and organic acids that are generated by microbes. And Joanna was talking about loop-key compost and how rock dust is added to loop-key compost. And that's true. And the concept there is that because of the incredible surface area of rock flowers, and because, you know, these rock materials are relatively inert, but when they're mixed into organic matter that is really rich with active microbiology, they're working and inhabiting those surfaces and releasing these organic acids and enzymes that helps to mineralize and solubilize these minerals that then become complexed and chelated into the compost humus material. And then that becomes available to the crops, increases their nutrition and their vitality when they're growing. So a real nice synergy there.
Yeah, and Hamaker always just said, you know, rock dust is food for the microorganisms. So with vermiculture, there's in India, a researcher who also showed earthworms love rock dust. I mean, it all gets transformed, right, biologically, and then, you know, for intake to the plant. So it's this wonderful, vast micro-universe that supports all life, you know, and it's really, I love the fact that we're at a nature farming conference where I know everybody really looks at it that way, you know, like there's something really sacred about that, you know, and it'd be so wonderful the more, you know, we can live from that place.
Great. I love the slides of the syntropic food forest down there in Brasilia. That's pretty cool too. Okay, so Ray Yoon has a question on here.
Okay.
Applying rock dust itself does the job, or on the surface or till? Do you prefer to ferment it, or no need? How do you mix with biochar? Simple mix or throw them together in the compost?
I'm familiar with just throwing them in together from the trials that we've done as far as the biochar and the rock dust. And of course, you know, the biochar is providing, like what a coral reef does, providing that in the soil to hold the nutrients in place, including the rock dust. As far as, you know, applying the rock dust, Hamaker said, if possible, apply it into the first 2 or 3 inches of the soil, but you can also just apply it on top. It is really assimilated very quickly. And actually, you can start to see it affect the microorganisms within 12 to 24 hours. Or Bob Kennard used to see it almost instantly, but then he's kind of a mystical farmer there in Sonoma. What was the other question of Ray? Oh, so I think as far as fermentation, I think it's all perfect. You know, there's one researcher I saw the name of, or not a researcher, he's more of an agroecology person in South America that I saw in your study, Steve, who does the compost tea with the rock dust incorporated together. I believe he does. So, you know, I don't know as much about all of that as I would like to, but I would think it'd be wonderful to combine those.
As a matter of fact, someone even mentioned down here that South American remineralization at the peasant farmer level is developed and taught by Jairo Restrepo as a ferment with cow manure. That's true. That's the slide I had on biofertilizers in barrels. So yeah, they do that down there. Okay, Ray Yoon has a follow-up question. If the rock dust is fine mineral particles, and if your soil already holds clay, which is also fine mineral particles, how do you compare the approach of applying rock dust versus revitalizing soil microbes to make minerals available?
Well, I think you could go either way. I think applying the rock dust might be a little bit quicker, but then some of the techniques here seem to be so incredibly sophisticated. I can't say that for sure, but I think the combination with the rock dust, so we're talking about creating tilth, I think, with the clay. You know, you want to break up the compaction. Is that correct?
Well, I think this is where we would look into maybe William Albrecht and calcium levels, and the fact that the clay would be saturated with lots of magnesium, but calcium in a rock dust would help flocculate the soil and expand it, being a bigger molecular pattern.
Cool. Yeah, I could imagine. That sounds good.
Like that's what I've noticed is I've been interested in using like fire ash for instance, as well as other rock dust that are high calcium. Is that with really clay heavy soil, we really do need to start bringing in back in more specifically the calcium levels.
And remind me of the rock dust, because I interviewed Peter for our website. We have an article on him there. Remind me of the rock dust that you were using. What was the source of it?
I've used mostly like basaltic rock dust that the last few years from a well being dug like over 100 feet down. And so it was like a basaltic sort of serpentine complex. I've used lots of fire ash. I did buy a bag of azomite one time, and then also went and mined like from old quarry, red rock quarry here that was a volcanic deposit. My own, just like grab some buckets for remineralizing back home.
Great.
And then of course sea minerals, because I never wash my seaweed, and I'll bring home like 1,000 pounds of seaweed a year. So.
Well, I don't talk nearly enough about sea minerals. I mean, if there are places where it's not going to be so practical to use rock dust, and I mentioned in one of the slides a dilution of 17:1, and I honestly have to tell you, I don't know where that number comes from, but you can apply it that way. There are lots of products that are sea concentrates as well as seaweed, kelp, and so on. I think someone mentioned something about spirulina in the chat. I saw it for just a second. I'm not sure what that was.
Yeah, there's a question about spirulina and EM. So I sent a patent on water quality and EM, as well as something about rice bran inoculated with bacillus in shrimp farming. So that's all very applicable in aquaponics. But there is another question from Eve. For small, medium scale food growers or organic gardeners growing their own food, what reading or video resources can we learn from to make actual use of, say, volcanic deposits that were recently deposited in the land? Any simple do-it-yourself methods for poor farmers to apply to their farms to take full advantage of this gift from the volcano?
Yeah, so I would say go to my website and download the rock dust primer. And there were a few slides from that in the in this presentation, but there's a lot more information that's more specific that will help you. And contact me if you have any questions.
There's also another question. We don't purchase any amendments for our farm and try to use all the resources of the land. How would you obtain rock dust? Is there a way to use something similar?
Similar to rock dust? Really depends on your location. It depends on the size. Again, looking at the resources that are available to you, but there are quarries everywhere. It isn't always so worthwhile to go to local quarry. At this point, I often recommend getting the product, especially if it's just for your garden, to find a product like where you are, Peter. It might be Cascade. There's a source there, I believe. So yeah, I'm not sure how to answer that question, I guess, as an alternative to rock dust, unless again you're in a place where you could use kelp or seawater, spray seawater, for example. And the Native Americans in the Northwest, I believe, also use seawater on orchards. I don't have really good resources for that because somehow through the years I lost it, but I remember reading that as well.
So, I'll just, throw out that I do believe that in the JADM organic farming, they do have a seawater-based recipe, for the broad spectrum minerals.
That sounds great. I was hearing about it yesterday, and I'm really excited about just everything I've heard here.
There's another question. Maybe this is more for Steve. Is rock dust used in conjunction with EM that you know about?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, you can. We put rock dust into the Super AEM brew.
Okay.
We're activating mother culture. We put some rock dust in there.
And then Grokashi maker Alan, he uses azomite.
Yeah. A lot of the ag brand Bokashi people are all putting some kind of azomite rock dust in there. And again, it has to do with the broad spectrum minerals. And we're talking about secondary, trace, and ultra trace minerals when we're talking about rock dusts. So yeah, it's just a benefit. The microbes can feed on them. They can turn on mechanisms. They can turn on mechanisms in microbes. Rock dust can also turn on mechanisms in plants. They're doing all kinds of stimulation. One thing to recognize about rock dust, there isn't really a soil test. I mean, you cannot take a soil and send it to a commercial lab or a university lab, and it'll come back and say, you are missing these elements that are in rock dust, and this is how much rock dust you need. That's not how it works. It's really more of a kind of holistic approach. And so you just have this concept around rock dust, which are from the earth, and sea minerals from the ocean, contain 70 to 90 elements from the earth in very small concentrations. And yet, if you think about the history and evolution of the earth, this planet was a fiery cauldron of volcanoes and minerals for 1.5 billion years before early life forms started. Then you have another 1.5 billion years of just simple, real primitive microbiology living in that environment. And then at some point, 450 million years ago, plants started growing and mycorrhizae started association with plants. So these plants and roots and microbes and rock minerals have evolved together. So we're just putting them back together. Let them decide how to feed on it. We really cannot deduce at the quantum level what's going on there, but it's a smorgasbord. We're finding a diet. We're getting organic matter in there and rock dust in there, sea minerals and worms and roots, and they're all just working together and deciding how they want to pick through it.
I love the way you put that. That's so beautifully put. Now, my next interview, you are coming up for the website.
Would adding feed grade rock dust to silage be an effective way of adding minerals to manure and ultimately compost?
Yes.
Yes.
Go ahead, Steve.
Yes.
All right.
All right. So,
Paul Olivier says maybe we should talk about how land becomes demineralized, because we have to mineralize when we do not recycle property and close loops.
Okay, that sounds good. Especially intensive industrial agriculture. I mean, that's incredible in terms of taking the life out of the soil, all the nutrients, not returning them. I mean, therefore, this idea there are only 60 to 100 harvests left. And yet when you see with something like the agroforestry model, you can just make the soil richer and richer. It's even possible to think about, a lot of farmers are going to simulate something like chemical fertilizers and maybe apply a little rock dust every year if there are commercial growers. But they could also do like Hamaker would have advocated, put 10 acres, 10 tons per acre, and then you don't have to apply it. It's not labor intensive. Then you don't need to apply it for a number of years, and you'll have this curve of increased fertility, and at a certain point you'll realize that you could add it again. So there's so many different ways to think about using it, really, and integrating it into what your protocols are.
That was beautiful. Well, we're about to switch over here in about a minute, so I'd like to thank you, Joanna, and thank you, Steve, And
Thanks,
I'm really
Joanna.
glad to have you folks here today, as you have been just lighting the way, so then the rest of us can join up and keep carrying the torch, you know. This is there's
Thank you.
I like that as tradition is not the worship of ashes, but the preservation of fire.
Okay. Thank you for having me. I feel